Paul, so um, some interesting information today with the details that came out about the Mozart strain, and specifically how it works in relationship to DNS. Um, you want to give a quick summary?
Well, sure. Mozart is not novel in that sense. There have been plenty of botnets that have used DNS in their command and control architecture. But what Mozart is doing with text records today is a little bit different. Certainly, Conficker was looking for A records about 10 years ago. And even a few months ago, we've seen other things look for their commands inside the DNS. The reason that this is attractive has been that DNS kind of works. You ask a question from anywhere, you will get the answer that everyone should get. It's a coherent, distributed, autonomous system. And so it's not quite the same as maybe making a web fetch to the command and control server, thus disclosing to the security apparatus where that server is. This allows you to publish from anywhere and subscribe from anywhere and not really have a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the criminal's infrastructure. The reason I find this so ironic is that today is also the day that Mozilla has finally followed through on their threat. They have changed the default for the Firefox browser's DNS for all US users to bypass the operating system DNS or the network's DNS and go directly to I guess, reliable, non-filtering DNS service in the cloud somewhere. Thus, any of us who might have had some infrastructure, some filtering, some monitoring to maybe use the DNS to help discover these problems and then block these results from being delivered have been disenfranchised at precisely the moment that we needed it for this particular virus outbreak. So to me, the two stories being in the same overnight news blast was just perfect.
Yeah, definitely, and certainly concur that I sometimes refer to DNS as a chump in that it does a super job of exactly what you said, answering the question to the best it possibly can without any sort of prejudice. Assumes the question is valid, and it delivers the answer that's authoritative and right, and it's highly distributed, very low latency, available from everywhere, and so it's never surprising to see that DNS is part of any sort of command and control. In this case, somewhat, not even. I think the authors were betting on the fact that people aren't necessarily monitoring some of this stuff because it's right there in plain sight if you were looking for it.
Right. I mean, it's a normal, if naive, view to believe that that everybody who is on path, everybody who's in the network path between the user and some distant service should be a dumb pipe, and they should just answer the questions they're given or forward the questions they're given and then forward the answers that come back. That's a very naive view. And what we've been doing in both enterprise and family internet controls for the last couple of decades has been to watch the questions that go up and use that as an indication that you might have malware, might have an intruder. Watch the answers that come back because they may be the last link in some chain that will then allow your machine to get infected because everybody who visits that particular IP address gets infected. So the idea that everybody should be a dumb pipe and let the end users do anything they want, I think is science fiction. And the reality of the world is that there are people who mean us harm. They're going to use our own infrastructure to do that. And, that's why my team came up with RPZ, the DNS firewall, in 2010. And that's why another team that I'm on came up with the DNS TAP telemetry protocol in 2016, is that it's just broadly understood in the security arena that you have to be able to see what's happening. And in some cases, you have to be able to stop what's happening. And, sadly, this is a prerogative that we have as network owners or network operators, head of household, CISO at a family or CISO at a corporation. But that same prerogative is available to other on-path actors like our ISPs who might want to use surveillance to help generate keywords about us to optimize advertising. And it's also used by on-path actors like nation states who might want to implement control over the culture by changing how the internet looks to the people in that country. And it's those later abuses of the on-path powers that have led to DNS over HTTP as a way to bypass all of just anybody who's on path. And sadly, that means that viruses like the Mozart, or excuse me, malware like the Mozart strain that came out last night are going to be the norm. That's everything is going to bypass the rest of command and control because now they can just use DNS because that can't be stopped.
Right. I mean, or enterprises need to continue doing what they've been trying to do, which is decrypt everything so they can figure out what's going on. And it's certainly for well-known DNS over HTTPS providers, it's fairly easy to block traffic to well-known. The issue comes to anybody who delivers that service for whatever purpose on any IP address or any DNS server out there. That becomes much more difficult to spot without decrypting.
You are so right, because we can't decrypt it effectively with the TLS revision of 1.3 and the encrypted SNI. All of our transparent firewalls are going to begin to fail. They're already failing for some apps. And that'll mean we have to move over to an explicit proxy, like a SOX proxy.
Right.
As you know, the Internet of Things has no way to be told what SOX proxy to use. So I think the idea of being able to decrypt this is leaving the party. And what we're going to be doing now is just blocking all traffic to any web server known to support DNS over HTTP. And that itself is going to be a cat and mouse game.
Absolutely. In this specific case, we often work with our customers, given that we're providing them all of the visibility in terms of what DNS is peeling off of every device at the device specific level. So a strategy that we often talk about with customers is, we know the percentage of TXT records that are queried by a Windows client or a Mac client or something normal on the network during the day. And it becomes a strategy from our perspective to start looking for anything that might be an anomaly. And certainly, we see there's all sorts of appropriate, obvious use cases for text records. And we see certainly the antivirus vendors using them pretty dramatically in order to ask questions about, the attachment you're opening an email, for instance, or something that may have scanned, just leveraging the ubiquity of that protocol, the performance of the protocol in order to gain an answer very quickly, but using basically the same technique, embedding a question that is evaluated and answered not from a zone file, but from generating synthesizing a response based on the question, which is exactly what's happening in this case. And so there's the visibility side to who's querying what, but then also just the understanding the normal use of the protocol in a corporate enterprise context and what might be abnormal. And that's an area that we poke a lot with our customers, because we see, and it's not just text records, it's mail exchange records. There's no reason for a laptop on the network, an IoT device on the network, to be querying for mail servers. And so it's that context piece that we're constantly helping our customers identify.
I think that is a natural thing to do. It's not like we have a broad array of choices about how to keep things secure. The complexity keeps rising, and we keep doing what little we can still do. So anomaly detection, like what you're describing, is the only way that you can possibly prioritize resources. And anomalies cannot be detected if you don't know the baseline. And so baseline counts on a certain amount of surveillance. And to me, what this highlights is that not everyone upstream of you is the enemy.
Right.
The owner of the laptop might have policies that they would like the browser to observe. They may have configured the operating system in a way with endpoint security software or different DNS filtering or other packet filtering that used to help them avoid going to dangerous places using browsers that didn't know enough about what was dangerous. Same thing with corporate firewalls or corporate DNS servers. There's a reason why all of the things nearby have been doing a lot of surveillance, and it's not nefarious at all. It's because we have an alignment of interest between the regulator, the corporate board, the CISO, the policies, the regulation, you know, HR law or employment law. All of these things play into what's supposed to be able to be possible on a managed private network, and yet we've got a number of people deciding that apps doing DNS is necessary for, I guess, freedom. And sadly, you and I look the same on the wire to some kind of an authoritative government, and there's no way to disenfranchise them without also disenfranchising us and our customers.
Right. No, for sure. But you know, so obviously the well-known service, you know, Mozilla has a canary domain, and I believe if you respond with an NX domain to this domain, they've made available on the internet, you can turn it off. Like, you know, there's, you know, Google seemingly is going to look to see if any of the operating system endpoints configured support the protocol before using it. It sounds like there's attempts from at least those different institutions to try to make, you know, by policy to allow an enterprise to determine if they want this or not. But I always get back to the fact that, you know, there was always a mechanism to get an IP address that might be moving around for a name that wasn't DNS. They, you know, they could have used any message in HTTP you wanted to before. So to some extent, I see what these different players are doing and recognize that they're implementing at least the possibility to block or to turn off or to, you know, disable that service. But it seems a bit, you know, in the case of Mozilla, potentially an afterthought. And you know, you still are relying on the informed user or the informed administrator, or somebody needs to do something to turn off what you've imposed on me.
So I agree with your perspective, but I have one that's maybe a little bit more reactionary, which is that I'm not going to negotiate with my apps.
Right.
They don't get to turn on a different DNS data path and exchange, you know, expose my personal information to one of their corporate partners that they have reason to trust, and bypass any security or logging or filtering I might have, and then tell me after they've done it and say, by the way, if you didn't like that, click here to go back to being insecure in the way that it used to be.
Right.
That is not how you begin a negotiation with me. And so the way that ended is I simply uninstalled all Mozilla Corporation software that was anywhere in my home, and will be doing that in my business, and I'll be blogging far and wide about why others should do so also. You know, and the canary domain that they added, as you say, it looks like an afterthought to me also. The canary domain is not a standard. Edge doesn't have to use the same one. Chrome doesn't have to use the same one, but especially the intruders and the malicious insiders and the malware and the supply chain poisoners, all of the other, you know, completely illegal or unwelcome users of my network are probably not going to respect any canary domain. They're just going to use this as a way to hurt me better, because now there's this standardized mechanism that they
Right.
can call upon. And so, you know, negotiating with each app about their canary domain isn't going to happen. I'm simply going to be blocking all IP accesses to the services outside my network that are known to provide DNS over HTTP. And if they decide, if somebody out there decides that they're going to make that hard for me by putting, I don't know, Netflix or, you know, something my family very much desires on the same address as a DNS over HTTP server to make this kind of policy too difficult for me, then I'm going to see that as them behaving unilaterally, and I'm going to answer them with more unilateralism. Right? We'll move that to a proxy, or we'll do without. So, I hate being in a war with a bunch of well-intentioned people who are trying to increase the amount of freedom, privacy, and autonomy in the world, but they're going about it the wrong way.
I mean, we collect the list of servers that we're aware of and provide that as guidance to our customers. But do you know of a good either open source project or otherwise where they're actively scanning for and trying to provide lists of DNS over HTTP servers out there?
So not at the moment, but there are, remembering that no one is a villain in their own eyes. And a lot of the people that are working on this are, in my opinion, terribly naive, possibly even disrespectful about the methods by which I keep my family and my company safe. They don't see themselves as doing evil things. And so they're actually pretty public about this. There are a number of websites, web pages where people have begun to collect this information, and others who want to join the project immediately go to those websites and say, hey, please list my service also. And that's because they all want to be used. And I realize
Right.
that if I take that information and use it to program my firewall, then that means I'm actually using their desire to be used as a way to implement my desire that they not be used. And so that
Right.
might feel to them a little bit disingenuous on my part, but that's what I have to do.
Yeah, no, I understood completely. Um, yeah, look, it's obviously a very difficult debate in, especially, us living in North America, where yes, our data is being used, and it's used for targeted advertising and other things, and for all we know, for potentially nefarious purposes as well. But the um, your the argument's always those that aren't as lucky, that are living within governments that are monitoring everything, and are really obviously in a very tough place to try to find some level of anonymity. And in that case, I guess where I always go to with this specific debate is, you're hiding one thing, which is your DNS. It's um, I, it, just hiding that on its own isn't going to solve the problem. And so it right. So that's the part of the logic of the argument that, frankly, I listen to, because I'm very well aware of the conditions in governments other people live in. But I don't see this as a solution.
Right. If you're in part of the world where saying the wrong thing online, or even making lookups about the wrong thing online, could cause the police to come to your house and haul you away, then DNS over HTTP is not going to prevent that happening. Because if you have an on-path adversary and you hide your DNS traffic, but you don't hide the rest, then the rest of what you do is easily going to indicate what the DNS answers were that you must have gotten before you did the next thing. So, if you intend to stay out of jail in an authoritarian regime, you need Tor. You don't
Right.
need over HTTP. And so, I have the uncomfortable sense that this is not just intended for the bespoke purpose. I think that the web industry does not like my ad blocker, and they are making sure that I don't have a place to put one.
Right. Right. Totally understood. Okay, so back to Mozart for a second. In this case, command and control instructions were done via beaconing of this installed malware to some backend DNS server. It seems like, I know there's just some initial reports about it. I think from an advice standpoint, certainly it's understanding, having the visibility, logging, looking, doing analysis, and understanding how the DNS is being used, inside the corporation is a huge part of that. Visibility is critical, and obviously that's the issue with DNS over HTTP. But for the majority of traffic right now, still it's just DNS as it's always been DNS, and it's not encrypted, and still many companies aren't looking. And so I think we both share some strong advice for enterprises and households
Yes.
to make sure that that very rich signal is available.
Yes, and it will be available for a long time. We're not going to see universal switch over to DNS over HTTP, not the least of which because a lot of people like me will block it. And so I think it's vital that everyone take a look at DNS, realize how much of their PII is visible there, and how important it is to run your own DNS server. Right. The story that you'll hear from Cloudflare or Google or Quad9 or any of those people is that you should use our DNS service because no one else should get to see your DNS traffic. And possibly Google's not in the cloud security business and won't be using this to monitor the effectiveness of the Mozart virus to guide their other businesses. That's certainly possible. But the way to implement this is, yeah, you're right. Nobody should see my DNS traffic, not even you. And therefore, I'm going to run my own. And there are some very good, you represent one company that has some very good corporate name service products. And there are some personal ones as well, the Pi-hole, or even just running it on your Windows laptop or your Mac laptop. Or there are plenty of DNS options that are not give your data to some big American company or any central company. And people should be doing that so that they are the only ones who have a chance to leverage the intelligence in their DNS feed. And so that if they decide to step up a level, I know your company has products in this area, they can start getting alerts based on which of their internal clients asked a question that seems to indicate that they're infected with something. This is the only thing we've come up with in 30 years of trying, and I don't want to see it go away. I don't want to see it go to waste.
Right. Totally agreed. All right, Paul, thank you very much. It's good talking to you.
Always a pleasure. Let's do it again.